"You may now kiss the bride," the minister announced, smiling warmly at me and Mark. As our lips met for the ceremonious kiss, I felt a wave of emotion rush over me. This was it. I was Mrs. Mary Thompson now. Just as I began to pull away, hoping to lock eyes and share a moment of mutual happiness with Mark, I caught him glance down at his pocket. The distinct vibration sound of a smartphone punctuated our forever moment. I couldn't believe it. "What are you doing?" I whispered angrily, my eyes narrowing as he pulled his phone from his pocket. "1 second, babe." "I think it's work," he mumbled, swiping his finger across the screen while our friends and family looked on, visibly puzzled. The romantic bubble burst in that instant. No longer did the venue seem magical, or the string quartet playing our favorite love song feel particularly moving. Even my white gown felt like a misrepresentation of the purity of the moment. All I could focus on was Mark's complete and utter disregard for the sanctity of our wedding ceremony. "Mark, this is our wedding. Can't it wait?" My voice had lost its soft, adoring undertone, replaced by a rasp of disbelief and rising indignation. "I'm sorry, Mary. I just had to check it. You know how demanding my job can be," he tried to justify himself, shoving the phone back into his pocket, as if that could reverse the gravity of his transgression. "Is it too much to ask for your full attention for just a few minutes? On our wedding day, no less," I snapped, my words laced with a bitterness that no newlywed should have to feel. The congregation shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Clearly, this was not the romantic spectacle they had anticipated. I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment, but more prominently with a quiet, simmering rage that I pushed down for the sake of the occasion. Mark seemed to register the gravity of his mistake and reached for my hand. "I'm sorry, Mary. Let's not ruin this day over a small hiccup. I promised to make it up to you." Reluctantly, I agreed. For the sake of our families and friends, and perhaps even for the tiny glimmer of forever that still remained, I forced a smile and nodded. We turned to our guests hand in hand as the minister declared us husband and wife, but the seed of doubt was planted, nestling its roots into the pit of my stomach. As we walked down the aisle together, showered in a rain of rose petals and applause, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just made a monumental mistake. "And so, the adventure begins," Mark grinned, pulling me close for a photograph as we stepped outside the chapel. "Yeah," I sighed, "it certainly does." Little did I know, the adventure that lay ahead would be unlike anything I had ever anticipated, an unfolding tale of betrayal, deception, and ultimately a self-respect I never knew I had. But for that moment, I was caught in a paradox of love and regret. Everyone told me that marriage is a beautiful thing, a sacred union that should be cherished and respected. I still wanted to believe that. Yet, in that fleeting moment, all I could think was how desperately I wanted to rewind the clock to a time when Ido had yet to become the Ido that I'd forever regret. We moved into my house not long after the honeymoon. The whole our home notion was more theoretical than practical because the truth is, I had been living there for years and paying the mortgage with my salary. Mark had been renting a small one-bedroom apartment when we met. His place was cramped and untidy, mirroring his chaotic, sometimes unpredictable life. "You know, I've been thinking," Mark said one evening, lounging on the plush, L-shaped couch I had picked out years ago. "Maybe we should do some redecorating. Give the place a new vibe, you know? A new vibe." I questioned, raising an eyebrow as I set down my briefcase, fresh from another grueling day at the tech giant I worked for. "Yeah, you know, make it feel more like it's our place, not just yours." I pondered his suggestion. On the surface, it sounded reasonable enough. All right. Let's talk about it this weekend. We'll see what changes we both want to make. Cool, he nodded, his eyes already drifting back to the football game on the TV. As the weekend rolled around, our conversation about redecorating was overshadowed by other, more immediate concerns, like the pile of bills that had amassed on the kitchen counter. It was always a similar pile, and it usually ended up in the same way. Me sorting through them and paying off the balances, mostly from my own account. Mark, these bills aren't going to pay themselves, you know. I said, a slight hint of annoyance coloring my tone. I know, he mumbled, barely looking up from his smartphone. I'll chip in. Just let me know how much. It was always like that. Let me know how much, he'd say, but it was always just a fraction of the total amount due. His office job didn't pay much, and though he always promised to look for something better, it seemed like an empty promise. With his birthday looming on the horizon, I thought it was a perfect opportunity to bring some joy into his life, and maybe, just maybe, alleviate some of the stress that came with his daily commute on public transit. I've got an idea for your birthday, I told him one evening, trying to gauge his reaction. Yeah. His eyes met mine for a moment, offering a brief interlude from his constant phone scrolling. How would you like to ditch the subway rides and have your own car? His eyes widened, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had his full attention. Are you serious? That would be amazing. So I did it. I took some of my savings and bought him a brand new dark blue sedan. Not an extravagant luxury model, but something reliable and stylish. On his birthday, I led him blindfolded to the driveway, my heart pounding with anticipation. Okay, open your eyes, I said, barely able to contain my excitement. The blindfold fell to the ground and he gasped. Mary, this is, Do you like it? I asked, although his reaction already answered my question. I love it, he said, pulling me into a warm embrace. This changes everything. You've no idea how much easier my life will be now. Finally, I thought. Finally, something to restore the balance, to make him feel empowered in a life that seemed to be constantly weighing him down. As he sat in the driver's seat for the first time, grinning from ear to ear, I felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, this would be the turning point we so desperately needed. For that fleeting moment, all seemed well. Our financial imbalance, the stress, and even the memory of the phone at our wedding felt far away. But life has a funny way of ripping off the veil from your eyes, showing you the stark reality hiding behind even the most perfect moments. I had no way of knowing then just how costly this gift would end up being, emotionally more than financially. Little did I know the seeds sown by this S-less act would soon grow into something twisted and ugly, reshaping the very core of our marriage in ways I could have never anticipated. Over the next few weeks, I noticed a change in Mark. At first, it was subtle, almost imperceptible. He'd come home later than usual, often without calling. When he'd walk through the door, his eyes would avoid mine, settling instead on random corners of the room as if he were searching for an escape. Is everything all right at work? I asked one night, sensing a distance between us that was more emotional than physical. You've been coming home late quite often. It's just work, babe, he replied, his voice tinged with an edge that hadn't been there before. You know how it is. Deadlines, clients, all that stuff. I wanted to believe him, but something felt off. Perhaps it was the way he avoided eye contact, or maybe it was the lingering scent of alcohol that seemed to cling to him like a shadow. But why not call? I get worried. I pressed, my eyes meeting his, as if trying to excavate the truth from them. I just forget sometimes. With everything going on, he muttered, finally looking at me, but only for a fleeting second. I'll try to remember next time. Okay, I said, pushing down the growing sense of unease. Just please keep me in the loop. Sure, he said, but his voice lacked conviction, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he wasn't telling me. The late nights continued, growing more frequent with each passing week. Every time he'd stumble through the door, it was the same routine: quick excuses, evasive eyes, and a new layer of distance that piled onto the last. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering how the man sleeping beside me had become a stranger. My anxiety peaked one Thursday evening. It was past midnight, and once again, he was nowhere to be found. I found myself pacing the living room, glancing at my phone every few minutes, considering whether or not to call him. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over his contact name, and finally decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. Just as I was about to put my phone down, it buzzed to life. "Hello," I answered, recognizing the number as one of my old friends, Linda. "Mary, it's been so long. How have you been?" she gushed, her voice tinged with a mix of excitement and nostalgia. "I've been good, Linda. How about you?" I replied, forcing a cheeriness I didn't feel. "I'm fantastic. I'm actually calling to invite you to catch up over coffee. I've got some big news to share." "Sure, I'd love to," I said, grateful for a chance to reconnect with an old friend, if only to escape the growing tension at home. We made plans to meet over the weekend, but as I hung up the phone, my eyes drifted back to the empty doorway. Mark still wasn't home, and I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that the walls of my own home were closing in on me. The man I married, the man who stood beside me at the altar, who promised to be my partner through thick and thin, was becoming an enigma. And what's worse, I was starting to question whether I had ever really known him at all. The facade of our marriage was beginning to show cracks, and I felt powerless to stop the slow unraveling that seemed almost inevitable now. But little did I know that Linda's news would turn those cracks into gaping fissures, changing the course of my life in ways I never could have anticipated. In the search for answers, I'd soon uncover uncomfortable truths that would shake the very foundation of my marriage and force me to confront the reality of who I had allowed into my life. Little did I know that the unraveling was far from over. It was only just beginning. The cafe was cozy, tucked away in a quaint street, its rustic charm a welcome reprieve from the growing storm inside my mind. Linda looked much the same, her smile still infectious, and her eyes twinkling with a kind of enthusiasm that can either lift your spirits or, in my case, make you wonder where your own excitement for life had gone. "I'm so glad we could meet up, Mary," she exclaimed, clutching a hot cup of chai latte in her hands. "Me too, Linda. So, what's this big news you've got?" I inquired, my eyes meeting hers across the small cafe table. "Well," she paused, her eyes darting away as if to catch her thoughts. "I'm getting married." "Wow, that's fantastic news. Congratulations." My voice was sincere, but I couldn't help but feel a sting of envy. Who's the lucky guy? Linda's cheeks flushed with excitement as she pulled out her phone. "Here, let me show you some pictures." As she swiped through her gallery, her expression suddenly changed, and she looked up at me with a guilty smile. "Oh, before I forget, look at this. He just got a new car." She showed me the photo, and my heart dropped. It was a dark blue sedan, identical to the one I'd gifted Mark for his birthday. The license plate was even more damning. It was the same car. I felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room. "Linda, when did he get this car?" "Just last month," she replied, oblivious to the turmoil surging through me. "Isn't it beautiful? He was so happy, said it was a gift from a distant relative." A distant relative. The audacity of the lie struck me like a slap across the face. "Linda, we need to talk," I finally said, my voice quivering with a cocktail of anger and betrayal. "The man you're planning to marry, he's my husband." She looked at me, stunned, her eyes widening in disbelief. "What are you talking about, Mary? That can't be possible." But as I pulled out my own phone and showed her pictures from our wedding, her face turned ashen. "Oh my God, Mary. I had no idea." "Don't apologize." "You didn't know," I said, though the reality was sinking in, each word like a nail in the coffin of my marriage. "I have to go, Linda. There's something I need to do." Driving home, my mind was a whirlwind of emotion. Anger, betrayal, shock. They all blended into a bitter brew that poisoned any remnants of trust I had for Mark. I thought about the late nights, the evasiveness, the scent of alcohol. How blind had I been? When I arrived home, I found Mark sitting on the couch, a beer in his hand, eyes glued to the TV as if he hadn't a care in the world. "Where have you been?" he mumbled, barely glancing my way. "Where have I been?" I retorted, my voice rising with each word. "The better question is, where have you been, Mark? Where have you been when you come home late, drunk, and distant?" He looked at me, finally sensing the gravity of the situation. "What are you talking about? Is distant relative the new code for wife, Mark?" For the first time, I saw a flicker of fear cross his eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. "Don't lie to me, Mark." I exploded, my patience finally shattering. "Your game is up. I met Linda today, your fiancé. Or should I call her your second victim?" The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut through. "Mary, I can explain." "No," I cut him off, my voice shaking but resolute. "You don't get to explain. You get to explain. You get to pack your bags and leave. And don't bother taking the car. That stays with me." As I watched him gather his things, each article of clothing a painful reminder of the life we had built and the trust he had shattered, I felt an odd sense of clarity. It was as if the veil had been lifted, revealing not just Mark's betrayal, but also my own naivety. Yes, the facade had cracked wide open, but what lay beneath was a woman ready to reclaim her life. And as I prepared to usher Mark out of it, one thing was abundantly clear. Revenge wasn't just a dish best served cold. Sometimes it was the only dish worth serving at all. After kicking Mark out, my emotions were a torrent, like a storm that couldn't decide whether it wanted to rage on or dissipate. I spent the next couple of days processing the betrayal, the anger, and the hurt. Linda was kind enough to call and check up on me. She had broken up with Mark immediately, her feelings of excitement about her impending marriage replaced by a sense of dread and betrayal. We promised to catch up again soon, under better circumstances next time. A week had passed, and Mark's things were still lying in a corner, a painful reminder of the years I had wasted on him. A call from a lawyer interrupted my thoughts. "Is this Mary Johnson?" the voice on the other end asked. "Yes, it is," I replied cautiously. "I'm calling from the law office of Brownie Associates. Your husband, Mark Johnson, has filed for divorce. and we'd like to set up an appointment to discuss the proceedings." My heart sank for a moment, but then surged back up. It was as if the universe was offering me a platform for revenge, and I was more than willing to take the stage. "Very well," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Let's proceed." The day of the meeting, I walked into the law office dressed in my most professional attire, a sharp contrast to the disheveled woman Mark had left a week ago. Mark was already there when I arrived, and I could see a look of surprise flash across his face. Evidently, he wasn't expecting me to look so composed. "Merry you look." "Good," he stammered. "Better than I've ever been," I snapped back, "especially now that my life has one less parasite sucking the joy out of it." Mark flinched at my words, and we took our seats opposite each other, separated by a long table that may as well have been a chasm. The lawyer began, "Let's talk assets." "As I understand, Mrs. Johnson, you're the primary breadwinner. How do you wish to divide the assets?" Given that I've been financially supporting our lifestyle almost entirely, I'd say I'm entitled to keep the house and the car, I said. My eyes locked onto Mark's. "The car was a gift," Mark protested. "I should be allowed to keep it." "The car was a birthday gift from me to you," I retorted. "But when you chose to violate the trust upon which that gift was given, you forfeited any rights to it." The lawyer cleared his throat, obviously uncomfortable with the tension. Legally speaking, gifts given during the marriage are generally considered marital property and subject to division. However, intent can be a factor. "Intent?" Mark queried. "Correct," the lawyer continued. "If the gift was conditional on certain behaviors or expectations that were not met, it could be argued that the gift should be returned to the giver." I smiled, savoring the moment. And what could be a more fundamental condition than loyalty and honesty in a marriage? Conditions you've clearly failed to meet, Mark. Mark's face flushed red, and I knew I had him cornered. "Fine. Keep the car," he finally conceded. "But I want half of the savings." "Actually," I chimed in, my voice dripping with satisfaction, "since you were so fond of lying, let me unveil something for you. My savings include a prenuptial account I had long before you entered my life. And according to our prenup, that stays with me." The lawyer flipped through some papers and nodded. "Yes, the prenuptial agreement does indeed specify that any savings or assets accrued before the marriage will remain individual property." Mark looked defeated, his eyes finally dropping to the table as if the weight of his deceit had finally caught up with him. "So," I said, standing up, "looks like you're walking away with just about as much as you brought into this marriage. Practically nothing." "Oh, and don't bother contesting the divorce. You don't have a leg to stand on." As I walked out of that office, I felt a combination of relief and empowerment. I had taken control, reclaimed my life, and dealt Mark the consequences he so richly deserved. But as satisfying as that was, it was also a wake-up call. A stark reminder to never let anyone take me for granted again. The unveiling was not just about revealing Mark's lies. It was about shedding my own self-doubts, standing up for what I deserved, and refusing to be anyone's fool ever again. With Mark out of my life, I felt like I could finally breathe, as if I'd been underwater for years and had just broken the surface. It was the end of a dark chapter, but also the beginning of whatever I chose to write next. And this time, the story would be penned on my terms, in ink that couldn't be erased or rewritten by anyone else.